Hi, boys and girls. It's time for chapter 4 of The Water Horse. Yesterday, when we were reading, we found out that Mother was going to let the children keep Crusoe, but she doesn't want him to stay in the bathtub in the house. So the children have devised a plan with Grumble's support to put Crusoe into the goldfish pond. So let's read about that. Chapter 4 is called The Last Sardine. It never entered Crusoe's head to bite the finger that was extended to him. The giant creature to whom it belonged was simply, in his mind, a provider of food, and thus a good friend to him. As were they all. This one now began to tickle him as he lay floating, flippers spread on the surface. Gently, the tickling fingers moved down the horse head and along the toad skin to the turtle back and all the way down to his crocodile tail. The sensation was delicious, and Crusoe squirmed in pleasure, eyes shut in ecstasy. When he opened them again, it was to see that 2 more of the giants had returned. And once more, they all began to make strange sounds at one another. And now the smallest giant, we know that's Angus, took over the tickling, rather more roughly. But it increased Crusoe's delight. He wriggled so much that little wavelets spread and slapped against the side of the bathtub. That's the only complaint I have, said Crusoe to himself. The food's yummy, the tickling's great, and the giants are obviously very decent creatures. But I am beginning to feel cramped in this small, cold, white prison. I wish they had somewhere bigger to put me. And at that precise moment, the biggest giant, as though he were a mind reader, bent over and picked up Crusoe out of the bathtub. Most of us can remember a few particular things from our childhood. All his immensely long life, the water horse had never forgotten the moment when he was launched into the goldfish pond. He did not know what it was, of course, only that it was 10 times the size of the place he had come from, and deep and dark and weedy. Excitedly, he paddled all around and then dived beneath its carpet to water lilies, and he began to scrabble around in the mud from which they were rooted. And here's a picture of Crusoe when he was released into the goldfish pond. This action disturbed a host of tiny pond dwellers, freshwater shrimp, and diving beetles, and wiggly wormy things, and off went Crusoe in hot pursuit. Now, with more room to move, he was already showing quite a turn of speed, and he caught and swallowed several of them. But most were too quick for him, and at last he surfaced, breathless, to see the 4th giant had also joined the other 3 to watch him. The water horse chirruped loudly at them. It was in fact the only noise he was capable of making so far, and he did it now simply because he felt happy. But its effect was immediate, for instantly the last of the sardines landed before his nose with an oily splash. "That's the last he gets in my sardines," said Mother. "Do you understand that, all of you?" "The last one ever," said Kirsty. "Couldn't he have one treat now and again?" "At Christmas," said Angus, "and Easter, and on his birthday, and on Saturdays, and on Sundays." "No," said Mother. "He can't. It's hard enough to make ends meet feeding the 3 of you, without wasting good food on, whatever you said this thing is." "A water horse," they chorused. "It's not a waste, Mother," said Angus. "He needs it if he's going to grow into a really big monster." Grumble pulled at his droopy mustache and glowered at Mother from under his bushy eyebrows in quite his old grumpy manner. "Would you begrudge the poor beastie a square meal?" he growled. "Yes," said Mother. "If you want to spend your pension buying food for it, that's your business. I dare say I think it would prefer smoked salmon." Well, we know smoked salmon's more expensive than sardines, so I think she's trying to pick on him. She marched off into the house. Kirsty looked at Crusoe, going after the last sardine with gusto. "I could save some of my food and give it to him," she said. "You could too, Angus, couldn't you?" "Nope," said Angus. "There's no need for this talk of saving food, much less buying it," said Grumble. "What we have to do is catch it for Crusoe." "Fish, you mean?" said Kirsty. "Well, fish, yes, but anything else we can find for him as well. In the sea, on the beach, in the rock pools, I doubt he'll be too fussy as long as it has some flesh on it." He looked at Crusoe, and just as he was swallowing the sardine's tail. "He's a carnivore, all right," he said. "What's that?" said Angus. "A meat eater," said Kirsty. "I'm a carnivore," said Angus. "You're an omnivore," said Grumble. "What's that?" said Angus. Somebody who eats anything and everything, said Grumble. Crusoe, having finished the fish, paddled along to the edge of the goldfish pond, and he laid his horse head on the concrete rim and chirruped. He's still hungry, said Kirsty, though in fact he was asking for a nice tickle. So am I. I'm hungry, said Angus. It must be time for tea, and he trudged off. Do you know, Grumble, said Kirsty, Crusoe looks bigger to me already, even though he isn't even 1 day old yet. Now here's an illustration of the goldfish pond, and you can see the family over here. Mother in the back looking stern, Grumble, and then Kirsty and Angus. And if you look real close, you'll see Crusoe. Much bigger than a bathtub. Grumble knelt down and stretched out a hand. He put his thumb on Crusoe's nose, and he opened his fingers as wide as they would go. The little finger touched the tip of the water horse's tail. Oh, he's exactly the same length as my hand span. How long is that? 9 inches, Grumble answered. How long do you think he'll be when he's full grown? 50 or 60 feet, said Grumble. 50 or 60 feet? Wow! Now, boys and girls, our school buses are 40 feet, so he's going to be about 1.5 buses long when he's done growing. Oh, Grumble, you're pulling my leg. He'd have to grow fantastically quickly to get that long. He will, said Grumble. You mark my words. And only 24 hours later, Kirsty did mark those words. They had a successful morning expedition down to the beach. Kirsty and Angus hunted the rock pools with a shrimping net each, and Grumble wore a pair of tall waders. He was trawling through the shallows with the big prawning net. The children had found a number of little rock fish, blennies, and gobbies, and Grumble had caught a couple of fair-sized dabs. Crusoe had the dabs for lunch, and now at tea time he was just polishing off the last of the rockfish. When he had finished, he came to the pool's edge as before. Angus had already gone into the house. It makes me hungry just watching him eat, he had said. Grumble knelt down and made a span of his hand again. He stretched it as he had the day before, but the little finger could not touch the tail tip this time. He's grown an inch already, cried Kirsty. A whole inch. In 1 day he grew an inch. As the days passed, the water horse grew and grew. Feeding him was less of a problem than one might have thought, for as Grumble had forecasted, he was not the least bit choosy. In addition to various kinds of fish, he also happily enjoyed prawns and shrimps and starfish, and easily crunched up quite large green shore crabs. He particularly liked mussels. Fortunately, the rocks were thick with them, and the children spent a lot of time opening them up for him. The fact that all of these were saltwater creatures released into his freshwater fish pond presented no problems, because they didn't last long enough in the pond anyways. Crusoe's appetite was growing as fast as his body, and as the weeks passed, he grew from the size of a kitten to the size of a cat, and at 1 month of age, when Grumble measured him, he needed 2 hand spans, thumb to thumb, to reach from his nose to his tail. It's quite long. What do you think? He'll be big enough to go in the loch soon, Grumble? Oh, not yet, said Grumble. Remember, there's pikefish in there that are twice the size. He'd beat 'em up, sang Angus. I bet he'd beat 'em up. He'd bite chunks out of those old pikes, Crusoe would. He'd tear 'em to bits. And he ran around the pond, paddling his arms like flippers and roaring and making horrible biting faces. No, said Grumble. He needs to be a lot bigger yet. We must keep on cramming him full of food for a good while longer, till he can look after himself and protect himself. After all, the great thing is here in the goldfish pond, Crusoe is perfectly safe. But Grumble was wrong. Chapter 5, we're going to find out that Crusoe isn't as safe as the whole family thinks he is. Have a great day, boys and girls.